Alright everybody, how we doing today? Yeah! Trying to keep my hair nice and neat. I like having long hair, but growing it out is a little awkward. You won't see it like this forever, though. You will eventually see it nice and long. Yeah, it'll be glorious. Anyway, Assad hits a wall in Syrian war as front lines harden. This is in Beirut, Amman, and the article is from Reuters. President Bashar al-Assad's assault in the northwest has been met with a painful rebel counterpunch that underlines Turkish resolve to keep the area out of his hands and shows why he will struggle to take back more of Syria by force. More than 2 months, Russian-backed operations in and around the Idlib province have yielded little or nothing for Assad's side. It marks a rare case of a military campaign that has gone his way since Russia intervened in 2015. While resisting government attacks, the insurgents have managed to carve out small advances of their own, drawing on ample stocks of guided anti-tank missiles that opposition and diplomatic sources have been supplied by Turkey. They're even targeting personnel with these missiles. It means they are comfortably supplied, a rebel source said, speaking on condition of anonymity because he was discussing rebel military capabilities. Turkey's foreign ministry did not immediately respond to a request for comment on reports that Ankara has stepped supplies of arms to rebels. While Turkey committed to the rebels, the battle for the northwest stands in stark contrast to a campaign in the southwest a year ago, when Western Arab states stood by as Assad and his Russian and Iranian-backed allies took the area. Despite Russian backing in the latest fighting, questions have arisen over whether Assad and his allies are entirely on the same page when it comes to northwest, where Turkey has deployed forces in agreement with Russia and Iran. Moscow has appeared keen to preserve its ties with Ankara. Even as its air force bombs in support of Assad, Turkey says Russia has intervened to stop attacks on Turkish forces from Syrian government-held territory. And this time there has been no sign of a major role for Iranian-backed Shiite forces that have helped Assad to victories in parts of Syria that are of greater interest to Iran, including territory near Iraq, Lebanon, and Israel. The capture of the southwest a year ago remains Assad's last big game. The prospects of further advances have been obstructed not only by Turkish interests in the northwest, but also the presence of U.S. forces in the east and northeast. American troops are still supporting Kurdish-led fighters following a reversal of President Donald Trump's decision last December to pull them all out. After more than 8 years of war, this leaves Syria carved up into areas of U.S., Russian, Turkish, and Iranian influence that seem unlikely to be stitched back together anytime soon. We could see the front lines harden and remain like that for some time, whether either the appetite or capability to fight through them is not there on the part of the regime or its allies, said a Western diplomat speaking anonymously in order to offer a candid assessment. Look, I don't even think we should be involved in this. This sounds like a great big mess. And I foresee this being something we could make infinitely worse simply with our involvement. Because the more sides you add to a conflict, the crazier it gets. It's hard to determine without an in-depth analysis like this article as to who's on what side and where who is, who's on what side and where everyone is, etc., etc. It's absolutely crazy. And I pity any old-school journalist, not an internet journalist, but any old-school journalist who actually goes to the physical location who might be getting shot at. Excuse me. That is a very pitiable position, but it's an important role to fulfill in giving us the truth of what's going on. Quite frankly, it's none of our business. Why are we even there? Now, if there was some major disaster of a human rights violation and it was a question of morality, that's one thing. But if it's a matter of sovereignty and civil war, then, again, none of our business. Bone-breaking battle. The Idlib area is dominated by Tahrir al-Sham, the jihadists formerly known as the Nusra Front. Proscribed as a terrorist group by the UN Security Council, the group has set aside past conflict with Turkish-backed rebels to defend the northwest. Colonel Mustafa Bakur, a commander in the Jaish al-Isa rebel group, said coordination among rebels was a major factor in foiling government attacks. I expect the battles to continue for a time because it has become a bone-breaking battle, he said in written answers to questions from Reuters. The government campaign of airstrikes and barrel bombings that began in late April was followed by the capture of around 20 villagers. This led to a rebel counterattack in early June that seized ground the government has been unable to recover. The Syrian government has described its operations as a response to militant violations of ceasefire agreements. Russia says action was needed to stop attacks from being launched from Idlib, including drone strikes on its nearby airbase. President Vladimir Putin said in April a full-scale operation in Idlib was impractical for now. Though the government has not declared the goals of the campaign, rebel sources believe it was to capture 2 highways that pass through rebel-held territory. Some 300,000 people fleeing bombardment have moved toward the Turkish border since April, prompting the United Nations to warn that Idlib was on the brink of a humanitarian nightmare. This whole thing is a humanitarian nightmare. And quite frankly, Russia certainly complicates things, especially if they can't afford a full-scale operation or to do anything with its nearby airbase. Personally, if you ask me, I think it's safe to say that at this point, hold on, what nation are we talking about again? Sorry, I have Syria. If the Syrian civil war, the nation of Syria basically doesn't exist right now. It's really just more of an amalgam of different conflicting ideas and conflicting forces. It's an absolute quagmire. And I think we're partly responsible for it. Didn't we basically kind of start it when we announced our decision to support the Kurds? For Ankara, the Syrian opposition's last major state sponsor preventing another major influx of Syrian refugees is of paramount importance. Turkey already hosts 3.6 million of them. While accusing the Syrian government of targeting civilians and its military observation posts in the Idlib area, Turkey stopped short of blaming Russia, instead saying it would continue to cooperate with Moscow over the northwest. The Turkish Foreign Ministry, in a written response to questions from Reuters, also said necessary messages have been sent to Russian officials to end the attacks on our observation points and civilians in the Idlib area. Hundreds of civilians have been killed, as have many fighters on both sides, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. Observatory Director Rami Abdullah Rahman described the operation as a failure on all levels for Russia and Damascus. A Russian private military contractor who is based near Idlib province told Reuters that rebel fighters there are far more professional and motivated than their adversary. Pro-government forces cannot win the battle for Idlib unless Moscow helps them on the ground, he said. A second Western diplomat said the government had suffered heavy casualties for minimal gains, which was deeply embarrassing. Turkey is trying to tell them, you cannot take this militarily. You have to negotiate, the diplomat said. Well, of course that's what a diplomat would say. They're diplomats. They believe in the idea of diplomacy, as do I. In my heart, I'm very much a diplomat. I agree with the ideas of diplomacy, but not globalism. A regional source close to Damascus described the escalation since April as a limited confrontation, saying Russia's ties with Turkey were the main brake on any full-scale assault to take the entire northwest. Of course, the regime has the desire to recover Idlib by force, but without the Russians it can't, because there are many militants and the Russians are completely committed to the Turks. It is expected that the situation in Idlib will stay as it is for a long time. Man, I could just imagine the aliens looking down on that part of the earth right now and just be like, what the fuck's going on with these humans, man? They're doing some crazy shit down there. They're killing each other. They're killing themselves. I don't think the world has ever seen a regional war quite like this, with so many factions involved. and with the proper regime of Syria trying to maintain control over the Kurds, backed by the U.S., it's just another proxy conflict between Russia and the United States. I see this as no different than, say, the Korean Peninsula, or what's it called, Vietnam. The only actual difference I see here is that the Russian side's no longer communist. Other than that, it's the same basic proxy battle. Mini Russia versus mini US. When I say the United States just needs to not get involved with things, I mean that for Russia as well. I sincerely mean that. We need to mind our own business and let these people solve their problems themselves, preferably with diplomacy. But this situation is absolutely crazy. But with the equipment they've been receiving, Assad could very well break that wall and get into where they need to go. But will we see Assad, or will we see the other side, excuse me, maintaining control over Russia? Or not Russia. Wake up, brain! Over Syria. Man, sometimes. But yeah, personally, Syria is just a crazy situation all around. Anyway,